Welcome to Rges Pre-Algebra. This is lesson 6.A and will cover in your book 1.27 through 1.28. What is a ratio? A ratio compares any two numbers by using division. For instance, we could say if Jacob has 8 pens and Ella has 5 pens, the ratio for Jacob's pens to Ella's pens, and order is very important as I define it, is 8 to 5. We read the colon as the phrase to. 8, so we would read that 8 to 5. We could also write it as a fraction form. And if we know we're talking about ratios, we would still tend to read this as 8 to 5. In both cases, the first term is called the antecedent, and the second term is called the consequent. So we could make equivalent fractions by reducing fractions or multiplying them just as we did, or equivalent ratios, just as we did fractions. And fractions are often used, or ratios are often used to express rates. For instance, 45 miles per hour has a ratio of 45 to 1. If we said a car traveled 450 miles in 9 hours, we would be thinking in a ratio 450 to 9. And this is going to become very, very helpful to us in just a few minutes. If a dozen donuts cost $4.20, we could either have the ratio, the donuts, the order I put it in is the ratio 12, that's a dozen, to $4.20. And of course we could reduce that by dividing, by simplifying, all right? The first example says, in the class election for president, John received 25 votes and Luke received 10 votes. Express this as a ratio. Very simple. Okay. All you have to do is say 25 to 10. And then simplify it by dividing both by 5, and we would get 5 to 2. It means 25 votes to 10 votes. The ratio is expressed then in lowest terms. For every 5 votes John receives, then Luke receives 2 votes. Okay. The next example says, find the cost of 1 apple if 15 apples cost $5.85. So we'd have 15 over 585. That would be my ratio. And 15 goes into 585 evenly. Let's see, 45, that would be 3, 5, and 9. Okay. So how much does each apple cost? 39 cents, or 0.39. You may write it either way. So, in your practice problems here, you're just being asked to write your ratios and make sure you reduce them to lowest terms if you can. If they say it in the form they're doing it different ways actually in their answers. So typically if they say 8 to 6 and you want to reduce it to lowest terms, okay, you want to go ahead and use the form they're doing. So divide both by 2 and you'll get 4 to 3. So use the form. If they're doing that form, you use that form. If they're doing a fraction, you use that and if they're doing a colon, you go ahead and do it with a colon. 3 ways to express the ratio. Okay. The last section on page 40 is pretty self-explanatory with the example that they give you. Look at the problem solving on the top of 41, and we get Mr. Everett traveled 235 miles in 5 hours. Find his rate of travel per hour. So we would go 235 in 5 hours, and then we want it as something over 1. So we would have to divide the 5 into the 235 to get your answer there. If 16 ounces of cereal costs $4.48, what is the cost of 1 ounce? Okay, so we want per ounce, so I'm going to flip that as $4.48 per 16 ounces. Right? And you see why I want the 16 on the bottom? Because I want per ounce. Okay, so put the ounce on the bottom and divide into it to get your answer up above. Use a ratio to find the cost of 1 orange of 5 oranges. Same reasoning. You're going to put the actually, I made a big deal about that before, but they're not showing that they care at all here. We could do it either way. We say find the cost of 1 orange of 5 oranges, costs 65 cents. Then I would just simplify. I'm going to get 1 orange costs whatever it divides into, and this will still be the price per orange. Okay, so really it's more about labeling or understanding what's what. This is the oranges, and this is the price, and so that will be what's going on the right side of the equation also. Or it's not really an equation here. I've written it so it looks like it, but it's really just a reduction, right? Okay, beware of number 4. They've introduced just a little sentence trying to trick you. Let's go on then to 1.28, proportions. What are proportions? Well, proportions are 2 ratios set equal to one another. So we've got 2 ways to write this. Here we're saying 1 to 2 equals 3 to 6, and here we're saying 1 over 2, or 1 to 2 written in a fractional form equals 3 to 6. Now in this we've got a couple of vocabulary words. These are called the means. So this and this are the means. M-E-A-N-S. These, because they're to the outside when written in this form, are called the extremes. And below I'm going to box the extremes. So the top left and the bottom right in any proportion are called the extremes. The bottom left and the top right, when we're written in a fractional form, are called the means. Now, very important idea, in any proportion, the product of the means equals the product of the extremes. So let me write this in a more general form. AB equals C over D, where these can represent any value. So I'm telling you that AD, the product of the extremes, equals B times C, or C times B, either way. Okay? This becomes very useful in problem solving. For instance, now we can sometimes call that, you might hear the term cross multiply. And that's fine to think of it that way. So let's say we have 3/8 equals 12 over what? In other words, what's the equivalent fraction to that? Okay. Well, I can do this by finding equivalent fractions. I multiplied 3 by what to get 12 by 4, and so I would multiply 8 by 4 and have 12 over 32. That's one way I can do it. Or I can use this approach called cross multiply. Okay. 3x equals 8 times 12, which is 96. and then divide, and you would get 32. Either way, right? So, but cross multiply becomes a very quick method often. Now let's look at the next example, and it says here 4 6 equals what over 12? Well, again, I could just do this in my head by saying 6 times what equals 12. Or I can cross multiply, and I can say 4 times 12, which is, I'll just write it like that, equals 6 times x. That's 48 equals 6x, and 6 times what equals 48, or you divide, either way you want to look at it, and you get 8. So it would equal 8 twelfths up here, or the x equals 8. Okay, so let me see if there's anything tricky on this page. Now, some of the answers they are giving as mixed numbers, but remember that it's perfectly fine for me if you always leave your answers as improper fractions reduced to their lowest terms. Let's look at the problem solving on page 42 for a moment. And it says if 4 apples cost 80 cents, find the cost of 6 apples. 4 over 80 equals x. Whoops, we're talking apples. I'm glad I did that almost, because that shows you that it's very important to keep what's going on here. These are the apples, and this is the price. So when I line it up again, I have apples and price. And then I would just cross multiply and work that out. If an airplane travels 800 miles, we've got miles in hours. This would be 800 in 4 hours. How many miles can it travel in 5 hours? So we've got the 5 lined up with the hours, and we want to know this. Now this is a good one to illustrate why proportions are so useful, because before I would have done that problem, we did it just a couple lessons ago, a similar type problem, and we made it a 2-part problem. You recall, I would have to divide by 4 to get the number of miles in 1 hour, and then I would have to multiply by 5 to get the number of miles in 5 hours. And now what I've done with a proportion is I've simplified that to a single step problem. Okay? Everything else should be clear. If it is not, go ahead and bring your questions to class.